After that last segment, you have to ask yourself, do you still think America is a constitutional republic? Well, if so, then you're kidding yourself. Our constitutional republic is gone. The three branches of government exist in name only. Rest in peace to the idea that America is still a constitutional republic rather than a surveillance state. One thing the Twitter files showed us is that the FBI is acting as the doorman to a vast program of social media surveillance and censorship, encompassing agencies across the federal government, from the State Department to the Pentagon to the CIA. And what you're witnessing is the total politicization of the federal government, which is incompatible with the basic tenets of a constitutional republic. There is no doubt now that America is ruled by its secret police, by the FBI and the CIA. And the more they target the former president, the more obvious it becomes. Donald Trump continues to be like a flashlight. He exposed the fact that America had collapsed into an oligarchy with a deep state that was still pretending to be a constitutional republic. It turns out January 6th was the last day of our constitutional republic. Congrats to the FBI and the CIA and DHS for subverting our constitutional republic so publicly that most Americans now believe we live in a techno-fascist oligarchy with a permanent class of left-wing activists in charge of our government. Well done, everybody. In fact, according to a new Rasmussen poll out today, a majority of Americans do not believe that the federal government today has the consent of the government. Almost half of Americans, at 47%, believe that the republic has already fallen. And join us now to discuss how Americans feel today about our constitutional republic is Mark Mitchell. He's the head pollster with Rasmussen Reports. You know, Mark, this has sort of been the overarching question in almost every story we've covered of late on this show, and I hadn't talked to you about this. So I'm curious, why did you all decide to do this poll?
We're always interested in what America thinks, and especially about our democracy, because it's so important to everybody. And believe it or not, that consent of the governed question is a question we've been asking for a long time. And the federal government, according to our numbers, has never, ever had the consent to the governed. This number is about where it's been. But you and I both know, especially with all those facts you let in with, that it's not capturing what's actually going on in the country. There's a colossal loss in trust in our institutions. And I have numbers to support the trends you're talking about. The corruption of justice, with nearly 2/3 of voters saying that the Trump trials are banana republic. Politicization of government agencies. 53% say the FBI is Joe Biden's personal Gestapo. And even the statism of the COVID pandemic, where half of Biden supporters wanted to take children away from the unvaccinated. So it's not accurate to say, 57% say the federal government doesn't have the consent of the governed. It's like we send these people to Congress. They don't do what we voted for them to do. That's not it. There's something totally different going on. And we've been trying to figure out how to capture that. And that's why we've been asking questions like the impending civil war, which we have some really troubling numbers about. But this most recent one, we're trying to capture exactly how bad it is. And we figured if we appealed to people's patriotism and hearkened back to the Constitutional Convention, when Ben Franklin told somebody that the government he gave the people was a republic if they can keep it. And that's exactly the question we asked. Has the federal government done a good job of keeping the republic, or has the republic the founders given us already fallen? And 47% of the electorate says it's already fallen. Only 39% say the government's done a good job of keeping the republic. But what's really interesting is who says the republic has fallen. And it's not the Republican-Democrat split that we so often highlight on your show. Here, 53% of Republicans say the republic has fallen, but only 50% of Democrats say the government has done a good job keeping the republic. Who says the federal government's done a good job? It's graduate degree people, it's incomes over 200K, and far and away, it's Joe Biden's strongest supporters. 66% of them, of those who strongly approve of Joe Biden, say that the government's done a good job keeping the republic, but 64% of Joe Biden's strong disapprovers say that the republic has already fallen. So it really is about Joe Biden. And I know they love to throw around that term dictator with Donald Trump, but when you look at a signal in numbers like these, they're talking about the wrong person.
Yeah, and talking about the consent of the governed, it also appears, based on another question you asked to likely voters, is that most Americans don't believe that their members, elected members of Congress, actually even listen to them or care what they think. That they're only listening to party leaders. Correct?
Yeah, absolutely. And we've asked other questions similarly that talk about how the system is rigged to keep congressional leaders in office, about how they're more interested in their own personal gain. And the other question we asked too, which is just, to stick a knife in Congress, would a group of people randomly selected from a phone book do a better job at addressing the nation's problems? And 54% of people say yes. And that number is the highest that it's ever been in our polling. So, I mean, Congress is horrible and not doing a good job, and everybody knows it. And that's kind of like what our polling's been talking about for 10 or 20 years. But in the meantime, we've lost the republic.
Yeah. And I do think you all are the only people who actually poll on election fraud as well. And you also put out evidence on your X feed as to why you poll on it, and why Americans are so concerned. And you have found so many Americans are concerned. But that brings us to an interesting point that we're in this nation. And speaking of us, other pollsters, it's so surprising to see Donald Trump dominating in the polls. We played a clip from CNN yesterday where the anchor just seemed flabbergasted that he was up by so many points in Georgia, in Nevada, especially. And I want to see what your trend is and what you make of it. Do you believe that Donald Trump is polling at such a high rate that it's within the margin that I guess what I'm asking is, can he overwhelm the fraud that I know exists?
To be an accurate pollster, we have to know if there is fraud out there. And famously, we're like the only pollsters, like you said, who even acknowledge this issue at all. And so people can follow our Twitter feed. And, this isn't tinfoil hat stuff. This is excerpts from official investigations and court cases and evidence that's been submitted. And there is election fraud, which means I probably can't, post this interview on YouTube. Now, the question is how much, and there needs to be a nuanced discussion about that. But looking back at the 2016 and the 2020 cycles, our polling was very accurate. We have a graphic for that. We can put it on our Twitter feed. Within the final, there it is, the final reported margins, we're within a point in both 2016 and 2020. And what we need to acknowledge from 2020 is that Donald Trump was getting spanked in the polls for most of that cycle. And I know Trump supporters don't like to acknowledge it, but it's the truth and it's what our polling showed. But the thing is that he looked like he was going to still win a victory by taking all the swing states. And that's when pipes started bursting and things kept getting Xeroxed and, the 2000 mules and all that stuff. Right now, I just went back and looked from our White House watch exactly 4 years ago. Donald Trump was losing 10 points to Joe Biden in that matchup. In our latest matchup, he's up 12 points. That's a 22-point shift, which equates to at least 34 million people who have changed their minds. There are not enough illegal aliens in the country to make up that margin. And of course, again, though, the problem is we're talking about the national popular vote. And you and I both know that very little has been done in these battleground states. And there's a problem there. When we go back in and poll Arizona and show that Carrie Lake, voters told us in Arizona that by 8 points, they reelected her over Katie Hobbs. When we go in and find like similar situations in other states, something's happening and that might happen again. And that's why I think people are really worried that some black swan is coming. They have this all or nothing lawfare attack at Trump that is helping him. So if they don't succeed, what's the plan? They have Joe Biden, who is running the Democrat Party into a ditch. Are they going to do a switcheroo? Like they are not on track to win this. And so in order to keep power, something big has to happen. And one of those things could be a very overt swing state operation that puts what we saw in 2020 to absolute shame.
That's what I'm concerned about. That's exactly what keeps me up at night, Mark Mitchell. But that's why also your polling is so important, because it lets us know the trends and how that lines up with what we actually see on election night. So thank you for what you're doing. You can follow Mark on YouTube. This segment might not be there because of the obvious topics we talked about, that you'll find it on our feed. It's good to see you, Mark.
Good to see you too.
And if you care about the future of our constitutional republic, then you should be demanding the elimination of electronic voting machines and the return of paper ballots. Steve Stern joins us next to talk about his strategy to restore our republic via our elections. Next.